From Detroit's bankruptcy to heading up the city's public schools, retired Judge Stephen Rhodes is here to talk about his new role as the DPS transition leader and 2 days to decide who'll get your primary vote. Today is Sunday, March 6, 2016, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, and welcome to Flashpoint on this Sunday morning, 2 days from the Michigan primary. Are you excited about taking part in this time-honored process, or do you just feel like you need a shower? Thursday night's debate remains stubbornly lowbrow, name-calling, constant interrupting, and in what had to be one of the most inelegant political moments in memory, Donald Trump assuring us that his bank account isn't the only thing that's well endowed. Three candidates and Fox News were all clearly gunning for Trump. Did they damage him, or did it simply make it clear that Trump is still the alpha dog of the group? We're going to get you set for the Tuesday primary coming up. But up first this morning, a conversation with retired Judge Stephen Rhodes. He oversaw Detroit's trip through bankruptcy. Some would say that job looks like a walk in the park compared with trying to fix Detroit schools. Rhodes is technically the new emergency manager of DPS, but in what the governor hopes will be a more hopeful sign, he's being referred to as the transition manager. And he's up first this morning on Flashpoint. In relative terms, Detroit's trip through bankruptcy occurred with breathtaking speed. The man who oversaw that, Judge Stephen Rhodes, is now taking on a new challenge as the head of the Detroit Public Schools. And Judge Rhodes is my guest this morning on Flashpoint. Judge, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
As the judge in the bankruptcy, you know how much boiling anger there is in Detroit over the idea of emergency managers, over the idea that there is no local representation over what many believe is the bedrock of a community, and that's their schools. Why would you agree to take on this with all you know about that?
I took on this role because I know that anger, and in some respects I share it. It is time to return public education in Detroit to local control, and I took this job to transition from an emergency manager to local control. We can't just flip the switch. There has to be a process, and I agreed with the governor to take the job of supervising that process.
There was a lot of talk about this behind whispers that you were somehow being recruited and was going to be involved. Was this a tough sell for you, or when this was offered to you, did you think this is something I can go make a difference and do?
Well, the governor can be very persuasive, but more importantly, this is about the kids in the city of Detroit. I felt that if I could help transition the school system from what it is now to a successful, competitive school district, that I needed to do that.
We've heard that phrase, we need to make this about the children, so many times over my 20 years now in Detroit, and yet it doesn't seem to be how it translates and works out. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I can't comment about the past, but what I can talk about is the fact that what the legislature has before it is an important decision about the future of Detroit public schools. Yeah. They have an opportunity now to pay the district's debt and to free up the
And you don't believe there's any question as to whether or not that is the state's debt, correct? Because this talk about bankruptcy and all that for the district?
Bankruptcy won't work because the debt that the district has is not the kind of debt that a bankruptcy will deal with. But to get back to the legislation, if we pay off the debt, then the regular revenue that the school would get, just like every other school district, will allow the school district to educate the kids and be competitive. It's because of the debt service that too much of the revenue is not going to education.
The other part of this, though, that there seems to be a pretty wide chasm right now between where the Senate wants things to move and where the House wants things to move. You even would like it to return to local control sooner than the Senate, but this 8-year outlook that the House has put forward seems to many to be either a non-starter or representative of how far apart the two sides are.
Well, that's right. But it's not for me to choose sides there, but I want to say this. This is not the time for drawing lines in the sand. It's not the time for old grievances and political differences to trump our moral obligation, our constitutional obligation to educate kids. Whatever the problems were, and I understand there were lots, they were not the kids' fault. Every every person in this state has a moral and constitutional obligation to educate every kid in the state.
Constitutional obligation, which is maybe often overlooked. But you talked a lot during the bankruptcy trial about how the way forward for Detroit seemed very muddied and cloudy if it doesn't get its schools in order. And yet I hear all the time there's not a big city school district in America that works all that well, and yet other cities find a way to succeed around that. Your thoughts on that are?
I have confidence that with adequate resources, the Detroit Public Schools can not only succeed, but they can compete and they can win that competition. Why do I say that? I say that because look at our Detroit teachers. They have endured working conditions that you can't rationally ask them to endure. And they have suffered with pay that is grossly inadequate. They have not had pay raises in years, and yet they stay. They demonstrate their commitment to the children of the city of Detroit by staying in their jobs and by going to work. And that demonstrated commitment, I think, is proof that if they have the adequate resources, we can compete.
Do you have an opinion then about the wisdom of the sick outs that they've been running through so much of this year, which on one hand certainly did enlighten a lot of people as to what was going on in the schools, but also have to be taken as a strike in a way, don't they?
Well, I don't want to get into the semantics of it, but you know, every employee,
as a former judge, I understand.
You know, every employee should show up when they are required to show up. But having said that, I understand the anger that motivated that. I really do. We have asked too much sacrifice of our teachers for too long. I understand their distrust. I understand their cynicism. But there's a way to break through that, and I want to break through that. And the way is for me to involve in this process of transition to local control everyone who wants to be involved. Everyone in the city of Detroit has a stake in a successful Detroit public school system, including all the teachers, of course, government leaders, civic leaders, business leaders.
You would like to see local control return sometime this summer. There is a fairly short cap on your tenure and how long you're supposed to be doing this job.
Yes.
We've seen so much turnover in Detroit schools and their leadership. Can you get enough done in a short period of time, or do you end up being just one more piece that turned over?
Well, there isn't a whole lot I can do in the short tenure that I will have to improve education. In fact, the district is going to run out of money in April, and we're going to need the legislature's help to exactly to finish this school year. But what I can do is set up this new district with the greatest possible opportunity to succeed, and that's what I want to do. That's what the governor is asking me to do, and that's what I want to do.
And you've said that as somebody who doesn't have a lot of background in education, your first job is to hire a superintendent, which I know you're already on. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this morning about the mayor's comments in his State of the City address, saying that here we've come out of bankruptcy and now we find that we are going to be way behind on the city's pension obligations, which is part of what got us into bankruptcy in the first place. Your remarks on that?
I don't really have any comment on the merits of any of these claims that he is thinking about investigating, but I do want to say this. I was very pleased to hear the mayor say that he is committed to seeing that the city's pension obligations are looked after. That is the most important piece here. Whatever the obligation is, it has to be paid, and the mayor is committed to paying it, and I applaud that.
Judge Rhodes, I really appreciate your time being here this morning. I know we'll talk to you again as we move down this path.
I look forward to that.
Thank you. Judge Stephen Rhodes, we come back, we'll bring in the roundtable to talk about the debate from the other night at the Fox Theater in Detroit. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. All right, right, welcome back. Let's follow up our conversation with Judge Rhodes with this morning's roundtable. Very good to have with me this morning columnist from the Detroit News, Daniel Howes is here, columnist from the Detroit Free Press, Rochelle Riley, syndicated cartoonist Henry Payne back with us, and attorney Reggie Turner, also former member of the State School Board of Education. And that's why I'd like to start with you, Reggie. Your thoughts on Judge Rhodes moving in now to this position where we have seen clearly way too much turnover. What can he do in this short period of time?
Well, Judge Rhodes has tremendous expertise with respect to restructuring on the basis of his tenure as a bankruptcy judge. Perhaps he can help provide some models for restructuring that could help sort out the finances of DPS. But of course, that is totally dependent upon whether the state can come up with a cohesive plan to move the district forward financially. It is $700 million in debt. And something has to be done about that if we're going to continue to educate children in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, Rochelle, this is all moving forward on this is very contingent on getting this plan pretty quickly through Lansing. And how much stroke does the governor have right now with lawmakers in Lansing?
Well, I can tell you that the negotiations are going on every day, and it's just a matter of constituents around Metro Detroit and around the state understanding that this is the last chance to have an independent school district in Detroit. Governor Rhodes made it very clear that if they don't provide the money so that he can do the restructuring that I think he's qualified to do, he's going to leave in June, and then they're going to be stuck trying to figure out how to have a school district. It'll be the worst debacle in the history of education in Michigan.
Here we go again. That's saying something, by the way.
The only reason this thing's going to get done is because it has to get done. Despite the Speaker saying bankruptcy is still on the table, it's not on the table. Bankruptcy is not a panacea, and it does not apply in the case of the Detroit schools. So, I mean, I talked with one person this week who's very close to the governor who said, given the situation the governor's in with Flint, about the only things that are going to get done in Lansing are things that have to get done, and the budget is one of them, DPS is another one of them, and certainly executing on what they're trying to do in Flint. That's probably about as far as you're going to get the legislature to cooperate at this point.
Fair point. Henry, your thoughts on this?
Well, Devin, I just back from Savannah, Georgia, which just opened its first charter school in the inner city. First. In Savannah, very troubled city just like this one. The good news is the parents and the kids in this town have alternatives. They have a lot of alternatives in charter schools, so even as the public school system goes through its perennial problems, at least the parents and kids have choices now.
Still so much about options for parents as it is, as I mentioned with Judge Rhodes, in most big cities. Let's move on to what I guess is still percolating is the story of the week, which was the debate from the other night. Daniel, you wrote a piece the other day that basically said, you know, we do get the government that we deserve. We get the government atmosphere that we create in many ways.
And tolerate.
And tolerate. And I guess that showed our level of tolerance is in an interesting place.
Imagine, it was kind of mind-boggling to see what was going on in that debate. Yet again, listening to Donald Trump give us his anatomy lesson, which you know, and people lap it up. People are cheering. I mean, you know, the coolest venue so far in 11 debates was by far the Fox Theater.
Well, there's no doubt about that.
But also, what a raucous crowd that, you know, I
Yeah.
thought, you know what, you can tell this is in Detroit. I mean, it just had a certain vibe to it, a certain edge, and you saw it on the stage, and it was not flattering. And, you know, this is a legacy of the Republican Party. They own this. They didn't take his candidacy seriously for a very long time, and now he's coming down the tracks, and they want to stop him, and they don't see how they can do it. And it's going to be an ugly crash, I think.
Rochelle, I would hold Fox somewhat responsible for throwing a little bit of blood in the water, though. The crowd was raucous, no doubt about it. And while Fox was very prepared, I thought Megyn Kelly was awfully prepared for this debate. But it was clear where they were making their target, and it was clear the kind of atmosphere I thought that they were hoping to create around it, because my first question would have been North Korea taking the safeties off of their nuclear weapons. That was an hour and 15 minutes in. I think they seem to want this rumble, right?
Well, let me just say three things. On behalf of Detroit, it wasn't the first raucous crowd. They've got 21,000 requests for tickets, and they had 50 that they could do, which means all of the different candidates' cheering sections were laid in. And, you know, the best debates, the most respectable debates are the ones where they don't allow cheering, where they have some actual discussion of policy going on. That said, this was not about policy. This was not a debate. This was a Saturday Night Live sketch, sort of, you know, disguised as a debate. And the Donald Trump show continued. I mean, if you look at the questions, either they were questioning Trump, people were responding to questions about Trump, or people were attacking Trump. It wasn't a debate at all. I will say I was happy that Fox, but when they brought down the screen to at least challenge him on something, there was actual cheering, you know, where I was.
It's interesting, though, that they didn't, these graphics weren't designed for any other candidate. I think that makes Rochelle's point.
That was unfair.
This was all about Trump.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, you look at the bigger picture here. Why are we here at this point? Why do you have two populist candidates like Trump and Bernie Sanders during an economic recovery? And the answer is there are a lot of people in this country who are really hurting. I mean, there are thousands of people in my area of the country where I'm from, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, that have been thrown out of work by Obama's war on coal. You have millions of people who either lost their health insurance or lost their doctors because of Obamacare. You have a president who used the IRS to silence the grassroots root. All of this is bubbled up in these two candidates.
And nobody talked about any of that.
And Donald Trump.
Yeah, that didn't come up, did it?
No, and Donald Trump is the vessel. The right wing sees it as their revenge against this left wing dictator we've had for the last 5 years.
Although, Reggie, I pointed out before, though, I believe that Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz are also representative of anger and frustration. You take those three candidates together, that's a lot of people that are upset.
Well, I would agree that people are looking for something. It's in my opinion, that Trump has been aided in his efforts by the networks seeking to make these debates like reality shows. I'd like to see you moderate a debate where policy would actually be discussed.
Why would you wish that on me? I've been very nice to you.
Yeah. But I have to disagree with Henry obviously on his characterization of the reason that people are in dismay. I think that much of the dissatisfaction with government, particularly here in Michigan, comes because of disinvestment in government and the results of the Tisch and Headley campaigns, which have starved government in Michigan and made it ineffective in meeting the needs of people here in Detroit and across the state. And I think President Obama's health care program has actually added people to the health care rolls, not taken them out.
And as much as I know as Henry would love to just let that one go, I know you're going to jump in, but I got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what we expect is going to happen on primary day here 2 days hence in Michigan. This is Flashpoint I'm looking for. Welcome back to Flashpoint. We'll get to issues in Flint here in just a minute, but let's point toward now primary day. Dan, is there any doubt in your mind about what's going to happen in Michigan on Tuesday?
No.
Did the debate change anything?
No. I mean, obviously Clinton wins big, I think, and Trump will win. The one I'm interested in is seeing how John Kasich does. I mean, what's very clear this week is that the strategy is Kasich's got to win Ohio. I think he's got to have a good showing in Michigan, and that is critical to whether or not the party is going to be able to stop Trump. And if Kasich doesn't win Ohio, and Rubio is probably not going to win from Florida at this point, it doesn't look like it. It's going to be very complicated.
Yeah, Henry, if Kasich's going to have any traction anywhere outside of Ohio, you would expect it to be maybe the next door neighbor. But he said, even though he's looked clearly like the grown-up often, he's had a hard time getting traction. No, I thought that hug was going to, ignite talk about kindness for once in the campaign. It didn't get that far.
Well, there's an interesting back room thing going on right now with Kasich and Romney. They're trying to figure out how to corner Trump at the convention. But what's really interesting is that when these businessmen come in, like, and Trump's a brand, but Trump is like Ross Perot, he's like Rick Snyder, and then he's a businessman who's basically without a party. I mean, all these guys looked at either going to the Democratic or the Republican Party. Snyder told us he picked the Republican Party. Trump picked the Republican Party because Hillary, he figured, was already the nominee in the Democrat. So these guys, this is a different kind of animal. He's a populist animal, but the business animal, Perot didn't work, in my opinion, because he was an independent. But now that Trump's figured out you have to be at a party, you have to be with their resources, he could be effective.
If that's how it all works, Reggie, it's getting harder and harder to see this being anything other than Clinton versus Trump in November, isn't it?
That appears to be so. And who would have thought we could get here? Again, the debate last night was, I think, an embarrassment to the process in terms of some of the content and behavior. I hope that we can get beyond that in the coming weeks and months. But I think with Trump as the Republican nominee, the only hope Republicans will have in the general election will be to excoriate Hillary Clinton through congressional
Yes, I'm a little
hearings
pessimistic
in the
about it
fall.
getting better as we get out of the primaries and into the general.
It'll be brutal.
Interesting though, Rochelle, Cynthia Candy the other night on our air made a really great point. Remember at the beginning of this, the Republicans were demanding a show of fealty from Donald Trump. Are you going to get out of the party? Are you going to run? And now you've got the party leaders trying to figure out how do we divorce ourselves from it.
You know, it's like you invite your uncle, you know, the drunken uncle, to come and stay, and then he won't leave, and all of a sudden you realize we really shouldn't have asked him to come. I think that Daniel is right, that Trump is going to squeak by. He will lose a couple of points because of some of the stuff that happened. I mean, comparing hands and whatnot, my hands are bigger than all four of those guys. So I thought that was very stupid on their part.
But Rochelle...
Wait, no, let me finish, Henry, because I need to get you. I think that the two losers in this, literally, will be the media, because people have less and less respect for us, and when you say things like left-wing dictator about the sitting president of the United States, I think it's irresponsible, and I think you can have your opinion, but the bottom line is that is why this is happening. We are helping to fuel some of the foolishness. Donald Trump, if he weren't nuts, would be a great hope and change candidate. People want somebody who, you know, talks tough and talks like they talk, but you can't...
They want a right-wing dictator.
No,
that's what Donald Trump is. He's a strong man.
Well, you know what? Actually, they do want that.
That's what they do want.
He's a fascist.
Well, I think we should stop talking about dictatorships.
I think that's a good idea, because I still live in America where there are no dictators.
We have divided government. We have
Donald Trump is the fascist model.
We have Republicans in control of 2 houses of the Congress. We've had a Supreme Court that has been conservative over the last few years. So how you can identify someone as a left-wing dictator when there is divided government and a majority of the government is Republican, I think that's
People tend to forget that Congress is even sitting there when they're talking about why things don't work.
Let's quickly get to Flint with the few moments we have left. Daniel, we had Tim Grimel this past week say that it's time for the governor to resign. And then he ended up with retaining legal representation this past week.
I think that's the big... I'm not surprised. I don't think anybody would be surprised that Grimel would ask for that. I think you're going to hear more of it. You've already heard it on the presidential campaign trail from Bernie Sanders. This is going to get worse before it gets better. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have the governor before a House committee in Washington, which is very rare to have a sitting governor come in and testify in a situation like this. And if these things run true to form, and I've written about a lot of them over the years, he's going to come away bloodied.
Rochelle, before I run out of time, the Free Press has got an interesting effort here going on with
Absolutely.
With Flint.
For the residents of Flint, we created a 16-page resource guide, no politics, no stories, just ways to get help, phone numbers to call, helping them to navigate the crisis. And they can get that. It's being distributed this week from churches, from the sites where they get water. We just wanted to help. Yeah,
Henry, you get the last word. We are still at this point. It's hard to believe there's still an awful lot of help that's needed. The cavalry coming in hasn't fully wrapped up everything or anything close to it yet.
Well, and the irony is that Snyder, I think, has done more to help inner cities in this country, in this state, than any governor. What he's done in Detroit is extraordinary with Kevin Orr. So hopefully he can, manage things in Flint and help those folks out.
I got to leave it there. Thank you all very much for being here. Thanks for the great conversation. Thank you for being here as well. Meet the Press coming up here next on Local 4, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week right back here for Flashpoint.